State Senator Mark W. Koran is a Republican who represents District 32. He is married with 3 children and 4 grandchildren. He lives in North Branch, Minnesota. He is concerned with health care, education, transportation, energy, taxation, rural broadband, government effectiveness, and elder care. Please welcome Mark Koran.
Thanks, Barry. We have to update you a little bit. It's 6 grandchildren now, so we started in the 8th grade. Thanks, Barry. It's a pleasure to be here. And Barry asked, it is my 5th year here, and it's a pleasure to see you guys. This is the world according to me. But just so you know, most of us never plan to be here. We really don't. The vast majority of people that we serve with never dream of one serving and having the privilege or even thinking about serving in these positions. And so what you find is that you can't believe almost anything you read about us. You end up with a bunch of great servants who make great sacrifices. Our families make the first sacrifice that let us do what we do. But know that there are amazing people that are there fighting for everything that you believe in and providing great sacrifice. They are very good people, and I'm blessed to be able to serve there. But Barry asked me to cover a couple things, and so I prefer as informal as possible. If you guys have a question as we go along, don't hesitate to raise your hand and or shout out, whichever you choose. He asked me to talk about kind of the world the government according to my view. I carry a unique view in government and a very valuable view in government and as it relates to how I serve in our caucus. He also asked me to speak about COVID. I think you guys have heard about that. I think it might have impacted your life today, and so we can talk about those things, kind of some of the things that we've done, and then kind of the lawlessness. You know, we've had a rise in crime in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and many people would like to go and say, well, you know, we can just move on, let them solve their own problems. But the reality is their problems are our problems. Minneapolis and St. Paul, the economic hub to the entire state. We need them healthy. And frankly, I have a personal interest because I was born and raised about 5 blocks from the Capitol. I was raised in the house my grandfather was actually born in, and my great-grandfather immigrated to. And most of my family still lives there. And so we need them to be healthy. But when you look at the lawlessness and relationship to the what has happened, and then the riots and the George Floyd incident, we'll talk about that as well. So those are the 3 topics. If there's anything else, I'm open, whatever you want to talk about. So from a government perspective, I think you guys let me give you a little bit of background. So I spent just under 18 years at the Minnesota Department of Revenue. I created all the state's electronic tax filing and payment solutions. And so if anybody's aware of that was 85, 86, 87 when I started it. 18 years there, and the last 18 years selling business process outsource solutions into government. Federal level, where they outsource entire agencies, to functions within an agency, to systems, to consulting resources, billion-dollar deals down to $500,000 deals. But I also always maintained a job in the real world. I owned a small business and always had a job in the real world. In fact, 2 or 3 of them when I was at the Department of Revenue. What the education at the Minnesota Department of Revenue really did is provided me with a priceless education on what is and how is government and its business model and its outcomes. And I think today, if I asked everybody, would you look and how many people think government's broken today? Show of hands. I would argue, I got plants back there, but they at least know what the answer is. But it's not broken. That's a really tough statement because it isn't broken today. It is not. It's designed to produce the results we see today. And it feels broken. It can feel malicious intent. It's a system. It's not because of bad people, but it's a system that has no naturally occurring corrective action in it. And when you have something like that, if you raised your children, right, if they had no rules in their house, would they still get older? Yeah, they would. Would they acquire socially acceptable skills that would allow them to fit, be prosperous, and successful? No. In government, they have a process without that naturally occurring corrective action. It then becomes and feeds itself, right? Government, it has its statutory requirements and purpose. Most of what government does is around right? Kind of the key components of government is safety, but our children, our disabled, and our elderly. When we look at what government does and it doesn't perform well, and it consumes our resources ineffectively, that's a theft of your hard work. It's a theft of your labor. But when that same model touches our children, our disabled, and our elderly, I can show you every day where that model treats those people horribly. And that model to me is unacceptable in any way, shape, or form. Both are the use of our finances and our fiscal resources. But when it comes to kids, and I serve on aging, I voluntarily went to the Health and Human Services because it really touches group homes and elderly and you name it, every facet of one of the true reasons for government. But when we compare it to a MNLARS system, as everybody remembers the fiasco of about a year and a half ago, the state system, it took them 10 years to replace the motor vehicle licensing and registration system, hundreds of millions of dollars, and it didn't contain half of the functionality of the old system. And again, it wasn't broken. The system is designed to produce that type of result because at no step in that process was there a check and balance or some type of corrective action. In fact, there's a perverse incentive. It's a perverse incentive that the less they do, the poorer they perform, the more they're rewarded because we need more people and we'll continue to do less. That's what the system does today. Now, don't get me wrong. This isn't an attack on public employees or good people that go in there to serve the purpose. And there are some amazingly grossly underpaid servants who do an amazing job relative to their worth out in the private sector. They really are. They're the ones making it all happen. But there's a whole lot in between that's not working very well. So you take that model that produced 50% of what it should have done in a core system, not even talking about the new functionality that it should have had. Apply that to healthcare. Apply that to the group homes. Apply that to the standards and the policies in which we direct for our child care centers and our nursing homes and our convalescent facilities. And I've been in all of them and I tour all of them and I see the outcomes of what it does. That same operating model treats those kids poorly, horribly bad. In the elderly and convalescent facilities, we are consuming more than 50% of our resources to collect data, to implement the policies government thinks is going to solve the problem. But what they're doing is they're taking away all those resources from actually providing the care. And so when we look and we say it's broken, government's going to come in with the solution, and they're going to have more regulations and rules and policies that take you away from more and more from doing the job you were designed to do. And I can show you, and this is a harsh term, but we have people that are brutally and sexually assaulted, and our policies allow it, and we knowingly allow it. Staff that take care of somebody in a group home. I know it's a little bit harsh. I don't want to go, but I say it because it's very real and it happens all the time. And the response from government is, "Wow, we're committed. We're concerned about it, and we're kind of committed to working it." Well, I can't tell you how many state employees we've had, how many private group homes that are now on lifelong disabilities because they've been injured based on policies that we accept, that we willingly allow. That's the outcome when you tie a human to it. And to me, anybody who knows me, it's horribly unacceptable, and I do everything we can to make sure that we bring light to it. But it's really a system in the model of what is government and what we get. It's designed to give us that. So for me, my entire term, or as long as I'm blessed to serve in the capacity I am, we got to work on what the solution is. And the solution is we have to insert those things that don't naturally exist. And the reason it's good here is all of you live in a community that you have cities, counties, townships, school boards. It starts there. The level of ineffectiveness in that model grows the further you're away from your citizenry, right? So a big county, a big city, you can still get that same ineffectiveness. The closer you are in accessibility kind of brings a little bit of accountability. But accountability doesn't exist if you don't show up. Everywhere we go, we get handed a bunch of interesting information at the state capitol, and it's like, you can't expect us to be the ones solving all the problems when they're local problems and stopping all bad ideas. All those bad ideas are incubated in the very cities in which you live in today. But so that's part of what causes the problem. Vast prosperity and kind of complacency with our citizenry have allowed this beast to grow to where it is today. We can no longer do that. And so to me, one of the solutions is In your world, everybody who's in the private sector, your accountability is natural and built in. Your product is great, sales team isn't that great, it takes care of itself. Bankruptcy is a corrective action. We have none of them. So we have to start to train our workforce, certify our workforce, and change the entire delivery mechanism and how we attach everybody to why they exist. The vast majority of the people that serve in the regulatory body that we all get to involuntarily participate in have never worked in the industry in which they regulate. They've never worked in the multiple facets of the business unit in whatever agency it is to understand the codependencies and dependencies or the interdependencies of why they even exist in an agency. And so I've had a plan for the last few years to get the governors to understand. Walt Disney does it very well. They have a full life cycle of attachment, and so we need those people to be trained and certified in the industry in which they regulate. So in the healthcare world, in nursing homes, it's a DSP, a direct service provider, a certified nursing assistant, or a what's the other, PCA, personal care assistant. I want everybody in those agencies, Department of Health, Department of Human Services, to be trained in those environments. If they don't even understand the basic level of certification of the people who actually provide the service to our citizens, how can we expect their decision-making to improve? But I also want to go a little bit further. We need to make sure and implement, like Disney does. It's not a complex process, or it's not rocket science, but to implement those policies to where they have to actually work in the front lines and live by the rules in which they write. That doesn't happen today. It's not even a thought or consideration in their mind. And so we have to impose those things to create that natural life cycle where they're always attached. And if you're willing to live by a decision that puts a violent sexual predator in a group home, and you're willing to put your child there, your mother, your grandmother, your sister, your brother, and live by those rules, I'll give you a little bit more credit. I still will not accept the outcomes that we have today. But none of that exists today. And so all of us can be influential everywhere we go or everywhere government touches you, voluntarily or involuntary. If you don't show up, it will continue to operate in the mode it is. So we can change that. I can tell you from the political perspective, I'm a Republican senator, okay? But I work with everybody. I don't care who you are. If you want to have a conversation, we all agree on the vast majority of things. But this governor, probably the only bipartisan thing that guy does is he refuses to meet with most Republican and Democrat senators and House members. We're in a bizarre time. Governor Dayton was inaccessible for different reasons, but if I needed him, and I worked on an issue with group homes where they took some funding away from group homes that was critical, I could get a phone call with him and we could have a conversation. At that point, his staff lied to him and wouldn't allow him. But he actually tried and he actually cared. This governor is isolated for very different reasons. He's being run by the kind of the more radical part of the progressive of the caucus, of their DFL caucus. I can't get a meeting with the sitting governor. If I can't, or they don't value me, in my opinion, I represent 85,000 people. What does he think about the people I represent? Not much. And so we need everybody to be aware that the media is selling this guy as some grade across the aisle. He's thin-skinned, angry, very polished. He can say more without saying anything than anybody we know of. But remember, we all are the warriors who can share the message. We need to make sure and try everywhere we can to hold him accountable. And we'll continue to do everything we can on our side, that's for sure. So any questions on the government side of it? My team knows I could go on that for a long time, and they've had plenty of it. Any questions? Awesome. Oh, question?
What hope is there that we can curtail this continual abuse of emergency powers by the government?
Yep. So that is one. We're moving into COVID. So one of the initial outcomes of COVID, or I think the Democrats have figured out that they've been able to weaponize government. The governor has weaponized government for his 18 months there. If I use the term government delivery vehicle, that's the state agencies. Those are all the people that are there supposed to be delivering on the constitutional nature of why they exist. The governor has used them and weaponized them to a level we've never seen. Well, we have seen it one other time, but I think that was at the federal level with our prior president. But he is operating in that mode. What they've discovered, and I think the vast majority of the people in the state have no idea. They think the legislature granted him those powers. There's a piece of statute that allows the governor to execute as in emergency, which is completely necessary, that the governor can operate for 5 days in emergency environment. In order for him to operate up to that 30-day window that we're currently reliving, it's like Groundhog Day. So he has to have his executive council grant, first off, the peacetime emergency powers to extend those powers up to 30 days. That consists of Governor Peggy Flanagan, Attorney General Keith Ellison, Secretary of State Steve Simon, and the state auditor Julie Blaha. They are the council who grant him the powers. They are also the council who grant him the powers for every executive order issued under the peacetime emergency order. Those remain for 30 days, and they have to be renewed on a 30-day increment. People believe because we've been called into special session that the legislature has a role in granting those powers. No, he has to call, as a part of him renewing and executing his powers, he has to call us back. And it's the only time that any legislature would ever be called back without some prior pre-negotiated agreement on what would be a special session. You would have that all negotiated. You would have parameters and guidelines. So, because only the governor can call the special session, and only the legislature can end a session, period. So that's the governor's choice, and what he's figured out is his ability to weaponize the agencies and then continue to perpetually operate in this environment where we have this renewed superpowers. They figured out they can move their political agenda 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years ahead, and they're doing everything they can. So taking the House back terminates those powers. He is not giving them up. I was probably the only member in this Senate caucus that said that he was not going to relinquish those powers well beyond the election, and what will only change is the results of the election will influence that one way or another. And that election would be either at the federal level or the state level, and that will determine what he does. It's a daunting environment, but taking the House back, we remove those powers. Now, removing those powers, they'll look and say, well, you want us to be less safe. There's not one thing that we'd become less safe. I'll get in 1 second. And we wouldn't be less safe. In fact, the role of government, we have 3 agencies, primary agencies: Department of Human Services, Department of Health, and Department of Public Safety. One of their primary responsibilities is always to be prepared for epidemics and pandemics. What did this example or this exercise show you? They're not prepared for any of it. And if we are not prepared today to end the emergency powers, doesn't mean we're not going to be able to legislate and to deal with the issues that arise out of this, right? It doesn't mean that, but it means that you would have a voice. We would play a role in making it and having a determination of what is necessary, what is political, and what is for the betterment of the people. Because what we're in there today is, I don't know that there's anybody in the room or the state could tell you that you trust anything coming out of anybody's mouth. So if we did need you to act, you wouldn't, because you can't tell fact from fiction. So, question?
Excuse me. You said taking the House back would give you an opportunity to remove the emergency powers, but you did not say anything about changing the law. Because right now, both houses have to agree to end it.
Correct.
It seems to me it should be written such that both houses have to agree.
Affirmative.
To continue it.
Correct. We agree. That part of the statute, that's already there. We already passed that off in the Senate already. But taking the House back, we'd have to have supermajorities to actually impose that. But when we did do that, because it's like, and again, much like many statutes, nobody ever dreamed that this would be used in a continuous basis and to be so politicized from day one. So yes, it allows us to take the powers back, but even taking the House back, we can't do that until January. But you're right, the statute's horribly written. Nobody ever, and it should be a positive affirmation from the legislature to move forward. Right now, we don't have a role in granting that power. Mike?
I imagine Governor Walz would veto it if we took the House in November, but that's speculation.
Yeah.
The governor keeps talking about a $50 million a month money that comes
Yeah.
every month as long as he has emergency power. Do you know what that is?
The federal government has created this whole slew. There's a variety of funding, right? If you code something COVID, you get a higher dollar. $50 million is one of those streams that they.
Is the CARES Act thing?
Yes, and what we've also done, we've lobbied all of our congressmen, stop giving us money. Stop creating incentives for people to not work and produce. Everybody that we know has a job. Stop it. Stop providing government. There's some necessary things, right? There's some economic issues that the spending is high. There's some economic things that will need to be taken care of. Stop giving our governments money. The impact on the economy, we're shrinking it, and so government needs to start contracting at the city, county, municipal, state level. And what they're doing is they're allowing a gross expansion of all the spending, meaning the hardships are going to come a lot harder to the state agencies when we're looking at cutting 4,000 to 5,000, 6,000 people. That will be functionally necessary. But you're right. The legislature, we can pass that law unless we have the supermajority in both the House and the Senate. The governor would veto that immediately. And so it does create the challenge. But removing that power doesn't mean we're less safe. It really doesn't. It means that we have a functioning role. In the initial kind of emergency, it was bipartisan. The legislature got together and said, all right, what do we need? Right? Bring all the healthcare experts in there. What do we need to do to make sure that we have utilization, ventilators from a hardware perspective? What are the tools and medical devices and PPE equipment that we need? What are the infrastructure? What are the things we need to do for ICU capacity? We've increased the ICU capacity to make sure that within 48 hours we could turn up 2,800 additional beds if it ever became what it could be. Thank God it hasn't. Thank God it hasn't, because government, by the way, wouldn't be the solution in the first place. And so we would be left to our own wares. And so thank God it hasn't. We did everything we could, and we show that we can operate in a manner that we represent all the citizens. You have a voice at the table. And when you have this, when we have things that need to be done to deal with the challenges that are real. I can tell you the other thing is that, much like they disrespect the legislature and the entire process, is that the information today, and my team knows my favorite statement is, remember, as it relates to COVID, this is a really good example of, it's what they willfully withhold is more damaging than the lies they tell you. And this is so true in this COVID, selling fear, because that's what it's about. From the very get-go, when they had two really high-performing high school students in college create the model in which we operated under, right, in the forecasting model. And so when you look at those things, and they've continued to use those, everything that they talked about and forecasted, we would like to believe them. I can't get, as a member of the legislature, not just me, the entire legislature has not provided access to the data in which they're making their science and data decisions on. We don't have access to it, and they refuse to provide it to us. So with the complicit media, every day you see a headline, right? You see the headline, my favorite one is ICU utilization's at 87%. What's it every day that ends in Y? You want to guess? 85 to 90%. But under the COVID fear, right? It's 87%. The average person looks at, oh my God, we're in a catastrophic environment. Continue to perpetually feed that fear. And in a bad flu season, we used to have flu seasons before COVID. In a bad flu season, it would go up to 95% utilization. The system is sized to meet the needs of the citizenry. I think you saw Dr. Scott Jensen. He's a Republican senator. He's taken a lot of hits. He's taken a lot of hits for us, and one representing the citizens. One, he's a doctor, very bright guy. But he's challenged and skeptical. He should have healthy skepticism of everything government is and does. And Senator Jensen has been right on practically every assumption he's made. When you look at the actual number of deaths, CDC, I think, did it pretty clearly. 6% of the deaths are primary related to COVID. Primary. That means it's 12,000, 14,000 people have died as primary cause of COVID. That means it's less than an average flu season and the actual true impact. And so when you look at those statistics and you look at all of the other information that they're not providing, if we can't get it, by the way, it's public data. All of it's public data. But if the agencies and the governor's supporters in those agencies choose not to provide it to us, they won't, and they don't. And to me, that's unacceptable. And with the complicit media, there's a couple, Tom Hauser, he's the guy that's actually asked a couple questions. You know what happens to him when he asks those questions? He's uninvited to future press conferences. That's how open. I think we should probably, we're redefining a lot of things in the world today. One Minnesota has a very unique definition in Governor Walz's world. He just won't share it with us. But a hint, I don't think it includes you. I know it doesn't include me, but it doesn't include you. And so we're seeing that every day. When you look at what they're doing, the testing, right? We've got the testing. Thank God hospitalizations aren't off the charts. Deaths aren't off the charts. They're rising a little bit, but we also have nursing home deaths where the vast majority, I think that's the only thing that's been true since week 2 of this, 75% or more of the deaths are in convalescent or nursing homes. Do you know only 2 weeks ago the governor and the staff finally started to test the inspectors that go out to nursing homes, right? You know the people that go to multiple nursing homes every day? They just started testing the state personnel who go into those nursing homes. They have failed to provide testing facilities and testing requirements for every nursing home facility that we have. In fact, you know what they're doing? Instead of doing that, they're going out to all the school districts, 180 different communities, going to try and find people they can get to test positive. Because that fits their public union goals of shutting the schools down. I think next week, I hear the governor is going to make a public announcement on schools. Likelihood is that they will be shutting the schools down. Their union, they don't, right? There's no guess who these beholden to. It's the public teachers union. So they're going to shut it down. If they shut it down, that's a huge impact on our economy. It's going to be really catastrophic. And it will continue to suppress the economic opportunity that's there. The people that do have work and are working today will not be able to do their jobs with the kids at home. I think the governor announced today 28,000 state employees will continue to remain at home. So your government's accessible only if you can find an appointment and they decide to bless you with their presence. That's unacceptable. That's unacceptable. You're required. You don't have another choice, right? As citizens, when you're forced to deal with government, you don't get a choice which one to deal with, do you? So that's what the governor's doing. Everybody has to get out. Everybody needs to go drag somebody to the polls, drag 2 or 3 people to the polls. There's still over 1 million people who are not registered to vote in this state. Believe that. Connie?
So, I told us before that it was till June that he's...
The what?
Till June.
Correct. The governor's going to keep those 28,000 people. He's decided till June, 8 months from now. That's extraordinary. And so I'm not sure what that underlying is. I know there'd probably be a lot of people that are happy about that, but they are not the people who are paying for government, that's for sure. But so when you go out there and you think about the people we have, there's over 1 million people that aren't registered to vote. The vast majority of those are center, right of center thinkers. There are people, they're out there raising their families, working their jobs, and not understanding that every vote does matter. In the House, Minnesota House, we lost the House 9 seats. Those 9 seats, 3,600 votes was the difference between the Republican majority and the Democrat majority. Every vote does matter, but remember, we're Republicans. Our standards are a little bit higher than Democrat. We're 1 vote and a pulse. So,
I just have to ask you, we're talking about the COVID thing.
Yep.
And as I go around and I talk to people, I run into different kinds of people. I get the kind that, oh my God, you don't wear a mask, stay in your basement, you're killing people, you're
Yep.
a bad person. And then I have the kinds of people who don't want to do that, not gonna play, this is dumb. I would expect a fair number of people to be running around with pitchforks and torches because the governor is shutting down my schools, losing me my business, and
Yep.
causing me a big problem. When you're politicking, where do you see that divide? Do you see a lot of the first type, a lot of the second type? Do you see people with pitchforks and torches?
It is, you see them all. There aren't enough torches, and when we call peaceful, we'd actually want peaceful protests. But we do see all kinds. It's really kind of their news source. What are they getting it from? And the belief system. It really is, and we see it all over. You go out in rural, we travel all over the place, and so you see People are compliant only from the perspective of protecting the businesses and the burdens that they've forced upon these businesses for political motives to do this mask mandate. It's all political. It became political 5 weeks after we discovered this. It was all political after that. Because the science on the masks, right? If you're vulnerable, there's nobody ever saying, right? If you're compromised, you need to do what you need to take care of on your own. Senior facilities, if that was true, wouldn't the governor have dedicated the resources necessary to our most vulnerable elderly? And the one thing you bring, in that environment is because of the masks and the mandates in the restaurant industry, they always say, they're just restaurants, they're just small businesses. Those medium and small businesses provide 60% of the jobs in this country, and they're vital to every Main Street. And the other thing we have in kind of that mask mandate is the avoidance of healthcare access. Most people are just saying they're avoiding the private sectors, they're avoiding the healthcare system. So we have real serious health issues, and that health avoidance, or the health system avoidance, is damaging more people, killing more people, the mental stress, the families, the divorces, the suicides. They're all way up there. The flu's gone away, by the way, completely. But all of those other things are really serious. The psychological damage that we're doing to our kids under this. In school, I have custody. My 7th grade granddaughter lives with me. And she says, Papa, they don't talk to anybody. Nobody talks to anybody. She's in 7th grade. And so can you imagine a kindergartner coming into that environment? Part of our communication is our facial expressions. To go into that environment. And by the way, this disease is probably the most discriminatory virus we've had. Really has been. It's almost exclusively senior citizens or those with serious underlying health conditions.
So far, according to our state's published statistics,
Yes.
since we started keeping track in March, there's been
Of the statistics they choose to let you know about.
since one death under the age of 5.
Correct. And it was a 9-month-old. It was a 9-month-old. And with no previous knowledge or conditions and no illness and no doctor visits. So, and it's horrible for a 9-month-old. But 9 people die every day accidentally in this state today. And so when you don't study those things, where you're not bombarded with it on a daily basis, it starts to really, really wane on your psychology, and that's selling fear. When they've got all media partners, it's very effective. I can tell you, we go over people that are politically active. It starts to be effective on them because you think it's real. It's not. And when they don't tell you, like the number of cases, they'll tell you, oh, look at the cases, we're way up. It's the number of tests. The vast majority of the people that are getting tested today are those that are forced to do it. 90% in the healthcare system in my district are forced to do it in order to participate in the healthcare system. And then you got the governor and his teams and his fleet of people going out in all these 180 communities. By the way, they don't tell us where those communities are. But I bet they're in school systems that are doing a hybrid or in-person learning because they're looking to shut them down. And so they're manufacturing what they want to see. And so we're not seeing asymptomatic people, right? In fact, most of them are all asymptomatic. And you have this 99.97 survival rate if you're under the age of 50. The average age is still 83 degrees or 83 years old, death, 75% nursing homes.
And the average lifespan in Minnesota is
79, right? So when you compare those things, and what I think if you saw Senator Jensen, healthy skepticism, but when you remove the other surrounding information, you remove all context from the conversation. And so you then don't have anything to compare it. Is it the flu? No, it may not be the flu, but it's a lot like the flu. And it's like a coronavirus. We've had lots of coronaviruses. So you see those things. We could probably learn something from the past, or at least to have a context. If it's 10 times worse than the flu, then show us it's 10 times worse than the flu. Show that data. But when you don't do it, all you can assume is that most of the information they're doing is to lead you to believe something. And I love Dan Bongino, if you guys follow him. One of his favorite quotes is, they're telling you a story, they're just not telling you the story. And that's their primary mode of operation. Question?
Yes, sir, Mr. Koran. When is the last time you heard in the media, television, newspaper, what else, as to the number of people that have successfully recovered?
Oh, yeah.
I haven't heard that for weeks.
99.97
So prove the little one.
survive.
Very good, thank you.
Yes. Yep, but that doesn't fit the narrative. I can't get you into the realm of fear and manipulate you and get you to comply without that. And then again, think about these poor businesses. And the only reason they're able to impose these things on our businesses is because of an overburdensome regulatory system that requires licenses at multiple levels. And so they've threatened all their licenses, and they've gone out of their way. Shady's up in northwest Minnesota. They said, we're opening. They put an injunction on them, and that's legit. They could do that. But they also fined them $165,000, and they never opened their door. And so through that burdensome and using government, and think about it, that's our top law enforcement officer. Our top law enforcement officer is the one leading that charge. And it's utterly disgusting. And they're real livelihoods. There are real issues there and real jobs for every one of our main streets that are being crushed. And so when you see that, I drive my wife crazy every day. The media has decided, even in a benign story, right? I record the news just so I can see what the headline is, to see what the murder count is, or whatever the headline is. And I can do that in about 3 minutes. I can get through the whole news cycle. But even when you watch it, even on the most benign stories, it could be the community events rundown of the day, they insert a single word that puts a negative connotation, and it's almost always anti-conservative, anti-citizen, anti-taxpayer. Every single one of them, even a benign story. And so when you have access to the inside, and I don't mean that's like, we're just you, we were your neighbor before we were elected, we're sure your neighbors today. But you are provided access. When you see what's really happening in real time, you're a part of it. And then you see it reported. It's like another planet. The information could be factually correct, but it's unrecognizable because of the bias of the story. And that's across the board. Question?
I'm not a conspiracy person.
It's not conspiracy when it comes true.
That's okay. And I'm not one to minimize the loss of life,
Yeah.
regardless.
Yep.
But until someone with the cojones to stand up and challenge the purveyors of information, how many people have we lost this year to automobiles?
You know how many people die every day?
Yeah, I do.
133 in Minnesota.
I was thinking on a national level.
No, but in Minnesota, it's nine accidentally every day.
How many people die of coronary heart disease?
Yep. The vast majority.
The numbers don't even come close
Yep.
to the China virus.
Correct.
But we have fallen for hook, line, and sinker to an environment of fear. When did we lose our manhood, for lack of a... When did we become governed by, we're Americans by God? What do we have to be afraid of?
And it's all a result of vast prosperity and complacency, right?
No argument.
It's what it is, and so and we can take it back. We have the votes, but everybody's going to need to get out and participate in it. Everybody, we do have them, and so we are. Some of us, even though we don't plan to be here, we ultimately find out we really do enjoy the politicking side of it, but more so that you're making the difference. I don't want my grandchildren to have to become the next greatest generation.
Use the smell test.
Yeah.
If it smells bad, don't vote for it.
Yep. No, and that's what it's been. And so it wouldn't be possible, and I don't think ever before in our times did we realize that today we have more vehicles to communicate than ever before in the history of mankind, and we have fewer vehicles to communicate effectively than ever before in the history of mankind. And so they've been able to use that. I don't think everyone ever dreamed that every single major large corporation, every media company, that they figured they could make the news, not report the news. And so that's what, but we've allowed it, right? How many people in this room attend a city, county, township, school board meeting? Yep. We allowed it. And so it starts there. We can't complain about the schools until we're part of that solution. And I can tell you, though, the Democrats spent the last 40 years focusing on local elections. They set all bad policy. They incubate it in cities. And they said, wow, it's a great idea. We did this in 8 cities. It sure is heck something you guys should do at the state and enforce it all over the place. It's a terrible idea in 8 cities and a crappier idea in 800 cities. But that's where it starts. And so, and we don't do anything. We haven't, as a political party, we've just kind of left it off there and hope it fixes itself. If we don't start focusing and recruiting and getting those resources and taking back those things that determine our quality of life in our backyard today, we can't then begin to deal with the things that float up to the state level and then tackle the beast of what is the federal government. So, question?
I just want to suggest that you may be wrong about Governor Waltz vetoing a bill that changes the emergency powers, because the only way it gets to him is if the election causes the House to flip. And having flipped, he will think twice about that.
Actually,
I hope.
I wish I would be wrong, but I think I'm right, or at least let's hedge the bet here. He already has the most powerful thing in his hand. He doesn't need us. And what he's done in the weaponization of these state agencies has been the most powerful thing that he's doing. He's rewriting state law and state statute as we speak today. Perfect example. And so they call it rulemaking. Rulemaking is a process. You don't want us making up every element, right? The implementation of a particular statute. Although I think we could probably do a better job now. But you need some of that autonomy to an agency to implement a particular statute, whatever it is. It was not there for you to write rule, which becomes law, without an underlying statute driving the activity. So think about it today. The one thing is going to touch everybody here. California just outlawed combustion engines and vehicles. And so Minnesota, the governor has directed the MPCA to implement through rulemaking process, no matter what you think is good, to use rulemaking to implement California's emission standards. And so they're moving through that process today. They don't care what we think. They don't care what you think. And so that's why we have to take that House back. But we also got to get the governor back. And if this exercise doesn't tell you, we dang well, let's break the 60-year tradition. We better have great candidates that come out November 4th that have decided they're going to be committed for our Attorney General, Secretary of State, and the state auditor. I mean, that's really what matters, right? Most couldn't pinpoint to you collectively how powerful does that machine become, right? At those constitutional offices, oh, they're just the Secretary of State. This is the sole empowerment of taking over the control and removing your voice entirely. And that's a scary thought. I've been close enough to government that I do believe it has become far more powerful. It supersedes the legislative body and the executive body. But I don't care if you're in a Republican state or a Democrat executive state, the machine itself, the government delivery vehicle, is a Democrat machine. Republicans come into it, conservatives come into it, they just don't stay. The people that come into it ultimately move.